The gentle hum of the Stargazer's engines filled the command deck as Captain He-Jin Lee stood motionless before the massive viewport. Her dark uniform blended with the void of space, creating an almost ghostly reflection against the reinforced glass. The stars beyond seemed to mock her with their peaceful twinkling, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing in her mind. The communication crystal in her hand pulsed with an unsettling blue light, its rhythmic glow matching her heartbeat. She had received countless messages through these crystals before, but this one was different. The formal summons from the Intergalactic Tribunal carried weight that even she, a veteran of numerous space battles, found difficult to bear. The soft whoosh of the bridge doors opening broke her contemplation. Commander Ta-1 Park's footsteps echoed across the polished floor as he approached. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. After 5 years serving together, she could recognize his presence by sound alone. "The crew is getting nervous," Ta-1 said, coming to stand beside her. His reflection joined hers in the viewport, his usually composed face showing hints of concern. "Word spreads fast on a starship." He-Jin nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on a distant nebula. "Let them talk. Better than the silence." "I've tried every contact we have in the diplomatic corps," Ta-1 continued, his voice lowering. "No one will say anything about the charges. Even our friends among the crystalline species are staying quiet." He paused, studying her profile. "This isn't normal protocol, Captain. The Council always provides details of charges before a summons." "They wouldn't this time," He-Jin replied, her fingers tightening around the crystal until her knuckles whitened. "Because they know exactly what this is about." The crystal's pulsing seemed to intensify, as if responding to her grip. The bridge crew tried to pretend they weren't listening, but their stiff postures and occasional glances betrayed their attention. Each of them had served under He-Jin through countless missions, through battles and peaceful encounters alike. They had watched her navigate diplomatic disasters and military confrontations with equal skill. But this was different. "The transport ship will arrive in 6 hours, Ta-1 said, checking his datapad. "They're sending the Tribunal's own vessel." Another break from standard procedure. He-Jin finally turned away from the viewport, facing her first officer fully. The overhead lights caught the silver strands in her otherwise black hair, evidence of 20 years of service to the Earth Defense Force. "You'll have command while I'm gone. How long will you be at the tribunal?" "However long it takes." She walked to her command chair, running her hand along its armrest. "Maintain position here. The Stargazer doesn't move unless I give the order personally." Her eyes met his, conveying meanings beyond words. "If anything happens." The unfinished sentence hung in the recycled air of the bridge, heavy with implication. Ta-1 straightened his posture, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes about their years of trust and understanding. "Chief Engineer Song reports the engine modifications are complete," he said, changing the subject. "We can sustain maximum warp for twice as long now." He-Jin allowed herself a small smile. Mayray always did work best under pressure. She moved to the tactical station, checking the ship's status one last time. "Make sure she doesn't push the systems too hard while I'm gone. You know how she gets when she's worried." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation and coded messages. He-Jin spent time in her quarters, recording logs and preparing files that might never be needed. She visited each department, speaking briefly with key crew members, her words carefully chosen to maintain morale without making promises she couldn't keep. As the appointed time drew near, she stood once again at the viewport, but now in her formal dress uniform. The medals and commendations seemed heavier than usual, each one a reminder of decisions made and consequences faced. The Tribunal's transport vessel appeared exactly on schedule, dropping out of warp in a display of precise navigation. Unlike the utilitarian design of Earth vessels, it was all sweeping curves and gleaming surfaces, a testament to the advanced technology of the elder species. "Transport vessel hailing us," announced Lieutenant Du-hyun from communications. He-Jin took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Put them through." The melodic tones of the tribunal's representative filled the bridge, speaking perfect universal standard. "Captain Heijin Lee, we are ready to receive you," acknowledged. She turned to face her crew one last time. They had all found reasons to be on the bridge, standing at their stations with barely concealed concern. "Commander Park has full authority until my return. Serve him as you have served me." As she walked toward the transport room, Ta-1 fell into step beside her. "The crew's behind you, Captain, whatever this is about." He-Jin stopped at the transport room door, turning to her first officer and friend. "Keep them safe, Ta-1. Keep them ready." She pressed the crystal into his hand. "If I don't return within 7 standard days, open this. You'll know what to do." Before he could respond, she entered the transport room. The tribunal's beam took her moments later, leaving behind a crew that would wait and watch and wonder what their captain had done to draw the attention of the most powerful governing body in known space. The transport beam released He-Jin into a reception chamber that seemed to be made entirely of living crystal. Light danced through the translucent walls, creating patterns that moved with an almost hypnotic rhythm. 2 tribunal guards, their armor gleaming with ceremonial markings, stepped forward to escort her. The walk to the grand chamber felt longer than she remembered from her previous diplomatic visits. Each step echoed off the crystalline floors, mixing with the distant murmur of hundreds of voices speaking in dozens of languages. The universal translators embedded in the walls created a subtle background hum as they processed this babble of communication. Elder Sang-ho was waiting at the final checkpoint, his diplomatic corps uniform pristine as always. His weathered face, marked by decades of interstellar negotiations, showed more worry lines than He-Jin remembered from their last meeting. "I came as soon as I heard," he said quietly, falling into step beside her. "They're breaking so many protocols with this hearing that I've lost count." The massive doors of the grand chamber parted before them, revealing a sight that made even He-Jin pause. The chamber had always been impressive, but today it seemed transformed. The crystalline architecture soared impossibly high, its transparent surfaces refracting light in ways that made the space seem infinite. Ascending rings filled with representatives from hundreds of species rose like steps to heaven. The luminous crystal collective occupied the highest tier, their bodies pulsing with internal light. Below them, the biotechnological evolved shifted their forms restlessly, their bodies a perfect blend of organic and mechanical components. "Something's different today," Sang-ho whispered, his eyes darting around the chamber. "Look at the military presence." He-Jin had already noticed. In her previous visits, security had been minimal and mostly ceremonial. Today, the chamber bristled with armed forces from various species. Their weapons, while decorated to appear ceremonial, were very real. She recognized the distinctive energy signatures of charged plasma rifles and gravitational disruptors. As they were led to the central platform, He-Jin studied the gathered species with a soldier's eye. The arthropodal hive collective had sent their warrior caste rather than their usual diplomatic drones. The silicon-based Mendweave had deployed their rarely seen guardian forms. Even the usually peaceful aquatics had their elite deepwater sentinels present. "They're afraid," He-Jin muttered, more to herself than to Sang-ho. "Of what?" he asked, but she noticed he already knew the answer. Before she could respond, a deep tone resonated through the chamber, signaling the start of the proceedings. The chief arbiter, a being of pure energy contained within an ancient mechanical frame, descended from the highest tier. The gathered species fell silent, creating a moment of absolute stillness that seemed to stretch time itself. He-Jin felt every eye, sensor, and consciousness in the room focus on her. She stood straight, her military training holding her steady under the weight of their attention. "This special session of the Intergalactic Tribunal is now in session." The chief arbiter's voice resonated in perfect universal standard. Though the being had no mouth to speak with, "We gather here to address matters of grave concern to all spacefaring species." Movement caught He-Jin's eye. Along the walls, massive holographic displays flickered to life, showing various views of the chamber. She noticed with interest that several of them focused on her face, broadcasting her every expression to the assembled species. Before we begin, the Chief Arbiter continued, let it be noted that this session deviates from standard protocol due to the extreme nature of the situation. The being's energy form pulsed with what might have been emphasis. The usual preliminary hearings have been waived. The right of species representation has been temporarily suspended. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Sang-Ho shifted uncomfortably beside her. They're setting aside 10,000 years of legal precedent, he whispered. This isn't a trial. It's something else entirely. Hajin watched as representatives from the elder species moved to their designated positions. The crystal collective's light patterns changed in what she recognized as their version of agitation. The evolved forms rippled with barely contained tension. A small movement in the upper tiers caught her attention. Hidden in the shadows, almost invisible to casual observation, she spotted members of the Sentinel Court, the Tribunal's most elite peacekeepers. Their presence at a legal proceeding was unprecedented. Captain Hejin Lee of the Earth Defense Force. The Chief Arbiter's voice cut through her observations. You stand before this assembly not merely as an individual, but as a representative of humanity's approach to galactic affairs. The chamber's lighting shifted, focusing more intensely on the central platform where she stood. Hejin felt the temperature drop slightly, a subtle reminder of the chamber's ability to control every aspect of its environment. Before we proceed with the formal charges, the Chief Arbiter continued, do you understand that your actions and words here today may have consequences not just for yourself, but for all of humanity? Hejin met the energy being's gaze steadily. I understand, she replied, her voice clear and unwavering, and I am prepared to accept those consequences. The Chief Arbiter's energy form flickered in what might have been surprise at her directness. Around the chamber, various species reacted in their own ways, some with approval, others with clear dismay at what they perhaps saw as human brashness. Sang-Ho touched her arm lightly, a subtle warning to be careful, but Hejin had already made her decision. Whatever happened next, she would face it as she had faced every other challenge in her career, with honesty and without fear. The chamber's crystals began to pulse with a deeper light, signaling the beginning of the formal proceedings. Hejin stood ready, knowing that what was about to unfold would change not just her fate, but potentially the future of human-alien relations forever. The Chief Arbiter's energy form pulsed with deep crimson, a color Hejin had never seen it display before. The chamber's crystalline walls seemed to absorb and amplify the ominous hue, casting blood-red shadows across the assembled species. Captain Hejin Lee, the Chief Arbiter's voice filled every corner of the vast space. You stand accused of destroying the seventh star of the Ancient Ones, an irreplaceable artifact. Explain your actions. The words hung in the air as holographic displays flickered to life around the chamber. Hejin watched the recording without flinching. The massive screens showed her ship, the Stargazer, approaching a distant star system. The weapon's discharge was visible as a bright flash, followed by a cascade of energy that rippled through space itself. Then, in a matter of moments, an entire star system vanished from existence. Whispers filled the chamber, 1,000 different species speaking in their native tongues. The universal translator struggled to keep up, creating a backdrop of overlapping voices that sounded like waves crashing against a shore. The seventh star. A representative of the Crystal Collective spoke, their body flashing with patterns of distress, was more than just a star system. It was a testament to the achievements of those who came before, a beacon of knowledge left by the Ancient Ones. Hejin's eyes remained fixed on the repeating footage. She watched her ships approach again and again, each time knowing exactly what would follow. The destruction was complete, efficient, and deliberate, exactly as she had planned it. Elder Sang-Ho stepped forward slightly. The defense requests time to prepare. There will be no formal defense, the Chief Arbiter interrupted. This is not a standard trial. The evidence is clear. We require only explanation. The chamber's temperature dropped further. He-Jin could see her breath misting in the air before her. The environmental changes were deliberate, she knew, a subtle form of pressure used by the tribunal. The human captain does not deny her actions, a member of the evolved observe, their biomechanical form shifting with interest. Look at her stance, she shows no remorse. More whispers rippled through the assembly. He-Jin could feel the mounting tension, the mix of horror and fascination from the gathered species. Many of them had never seen such direct, destructive action from a younger race. The holographic displays shifted, showing detailed scans of the star system from before its destruction. The seventh star had been a marvel of ancient engineering, a star system transformed into a vast database of knowledge, its planets converted into storage devices on a scale that defied modern understanding. That star system, the chief arbiter's voice carried notes of what might have been grief, contained the accumulated wisdom of a civilization that had achieved transcendence, knowledge that could have elevated all our species to new heights of understanding. He-Jin finally moved, taking one step forward on the central platform. The guards tensed, their weapons humming softly as power cycled through them. She ignored them, focusing instead on the chief arbiter. "You speak of knowledge," she said, her voice clear and steady, "but not of responsibility." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. Even Sang-Ho looked startled by her directness. The chief arbiter's energy form flickered rapidly, processing her words. "Explain," the ancient being commanded. He-Jin gestured to the displays. "Show the deep scans," she said. "Show what your sensors detected beneath the surface of that knowledge." There was a moment of hesitation before the chief arbiter complied. The holographic displays shifted again, revealing layers of data that had been hidden from the initial presentation. Complex energy patterns became visible, showing something moving beneath the surface of the transformed planets. The seventh star was more than a database, He-Jin continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. It was a trap, a weapon waiting to be triggered, and it was waking up. The assembled species stirred uneasily. The crystal collective's light patterns became erratic. The evolved's forms rippled with increased agitation. Even the Sentinel Corps members in the shadows seemed to lean forward with greater attention. "You destroyed it without consultation," a representative of the Mindweave accused, "without bringing your evidence to the tribunal." "Because there was no time for debate," He-Jin replied, her voice hardening. "No time for committees and discussions while that system came alive. I made the choice that had to be made." The chief arbiter's energy form expanded slightly. "And you believe you had the right to make that choice, to destroy the legacy of the Ancient Ones based on your interpretation of the data." He-Jin looked up at the assembled species, her eyes moving from one group to another. "I had the responsibility," she corrected, "something you all seem to have forgotten in your pursuit of knowledge." The chamber erupted in a chaos of voices and reactions. The guards moved closer, their weapons now openly charged. But He-Jin stood her ground, waiting for the moment she knew would come, the moment when she would have to reveal exactly what she had seen in that ancient star system, and why its destruction had been not just necessary, but vital for the survival of all species present. He-Jin closed her eyes for a moment as the memories washed over her. The events of 6 months ago played in her mind with crystal clarity, every detail as sharp as if it had happened yesterday. The Stargazer had been on a routine patrol of the outer systems. Most of the crew was relaxed, even bored, as they mapped the supposedly empty region of space. The ship's sensors swept through their standard patterns, gathering data that would normally have been filed away and forgotten. Lieutenant Ji-Ho Kim had been at his station, sifting through the sensor readings with his usual methodical precision. He-Jin remembered exactly how he had looked up from his console, his face suddenly pale in the blue light of his displays. "Captain," he had called out, his voice carrying an edge that made every head on the bridge turn. "I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the 7th system." He-Jin had walked to his station, looking over his shoulder at the readings. The patterns had seemed familiar, tugging at something in her memory. Analysis. Ji-Ho's hands had moved across his console, bringing up comparison data. The energy signature matches. He had paused, double-checking his readings. Captain, these patterns match the dormant state of the hive mind. The word had hit the bridge like a physical blow. Several crew members had inhaled sharply. Commander Park had moved closer, his face showing the same horror Hejin had felt. "Confirm," she had ordered, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her stomach. The next hour had been a blur of detailed scans and analysis. Jeho had worked with engineering to boost the sensor power, probing deeper into the seemingly abandoned system. Each new reading had only confirmed their worst fears. "The numbers are..." Jeho's voice had trembled as he reported the final analysis. "Millions, Captain. Millions of them in dormant state, waiting to wake. And the energy readings suggest the dormancy is ending." Hejin remembered standing at the viewport, staring at the distant star that housed this nightmare. Her mind had filled with images from humanity's first encounter with the hive mind 5 years earlier. The destruction of the Omega colonies. The loss of 3 billion lives in less than a week. She had seen the recordings from that first attack. The way the hive mind's drones had swarmed over populated worlds, consuming everything in their path. Organic matter, technology, even the very atmosphere. Nothing had been spared. Those who survived spoke of a hunger that could never be satisfied, a consciousness that viewed all other life as nothing more than resources to be consumed. "Show me the containment field readings," she had ordered, pushing aside the memories of past horrors. The data had confirmed her worst fears. The ancient technology that had kept the hive mind dormant was failing. The system they had thought was just another ancient artifact was actually a prison, built by the Ancient Ones to contain something they couldn't destroy. "How long?" she had asked. Jeho had run the calculations 3 times. At the current rate of degradation, 2 weeks. Maybe less. The weight of command had never felt heavier than in that moment. Hejin had known what a fully awakened hive mind could do. The last time, humanity had barely stopped them with the help of 3 other species, and that was just a small colony. This was millions of them, with the resources of an entire star system at their disposal. She remembered walking to her ready room, accessing the classified files from the first hive mind war. The images still haunted her, worlds stripped bare, entire species reduced to less than 1,000 survivors. The hive mind didn't just kill, it consumed, learned, and adapted. Each victory made it stronger, smarter, more difficult to fight. The decision had formed in her mind even as she reviewed the old battle reports. She had known what it would cost her, what it would mean for her career and possibly for humanity's standing in the galactic community. But she had also known what would happen if she did nothing. Back in the present, Hejin opened her eyes to face the tribunal. The memories of those moments, of the weight of that decision, gave her strength. She could see in the faces and forms of the assembled species that many of them had never faced such a choice. They had never had to decide between preserving knowledge and preventing catastrophe. "You speak of the Ancient One's legacy," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her memories. "But you forget that they were not infallible. They made mistakes, and some of those mistakes were sealed away in places like the 7th star, waiting to be unleashed on an unsuspecting galaxy." The chamber had grown quieter now, the earlier chaos settling into a tense silence. Even the chief arbiter seemed to be waiting for what would come next. Hejin knew she would have to tell them everything. About the discovery, about the horror they had found hidden beneath layers of ancient technology, and about the choice that had saved them all, even if they didn't know it yet. Hejin stood straight on the central platform, the weight of countless eyes and sensors upon her. The chamber's whispers had grown into a steady murmur of speculation and accusation. She could feel Elder Sangho's tension beside her, could see the guards' weapons still trained on her position. "Yes," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "I gave the order to destroy the system." The chamber erupted in shock. Species of all forms reacted with their own expressions of disbelief and outrage. The crystal collective flared with intense light. The evolved forms rippled violently. Even the usually stoic Mindweave showed signs of disturbance in their collective field. Hajin waited for the initial wave of reaction to pass, then continued, her voice stronger. Because that artifact you all revered was not just a database. It was a breeding ground for the hive mind. Millions of dormant eggs, waiting to hatch and consume everything in their path. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Even the chamber's background hum seemed to fade away. She could see the impact of her words rippling through the assembled species like a shockwave. With deliberate movements, she reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew 3 data crystals. Their surfaces gleamed with stored information, catching the chamber's light and throwing it back in rainbow patterns. "These contain my ship's sensor logs," she said, holding them up, complete and unaltered. While you all debated in your councils about the proper procedures for studying ancient artifacts, they were beginning to wake. The Chief Arbiter's energy form moved closer, examining the crystals. "These readings, they are genuine. Every measurement, every scan, every analysis is there," Ho Jin confirmed. "Lieutenant Jeho Kim, my science officer, documented everything." The energy signatures were unmistakable. Holographic displays activated around the chamber, beginning to show the data from the crystals. He-Jin watched as the assembled species saw what her crew had discovered, the terrible truth hidden beneath the surface of that ancient system. The containment fields were failing, she continued, pointing to specific readings in the displays. The Ancient One's technology, as advanced as it was, couldn't hold them forever. "We estimated 2 weeks at most before complete failure." A representative of the Evolved stepped forward, their form shifting to better process the data. "These energy patterns, they matched the historical records of the Great Devastation. 5 years ago," Hujin said, "humanity faced a single hive mind colony. It took the combined forces of 4 species to stop them, and the cost was billions of lives." She gestured to the displays. This was millions of them, with access to the Ancient One's technology. How many worlds would have been lost while the tribunal debated the proper response? The Crystal Collective's representative pulsed with agitation. "You had no authority to make such a decision." "The protocols. The protocols would have doomed us all," Hajin interrupted. "I've seen what the Higman does to populated worlds. I've watched recordings of their attacks. Every moment we delayed would have given them more time to awaken, to grow stronger." She turned to face the Chief Arbiter directly. "I made the call because someone had to. Because while the elder species worried about preserving knowledge, that knowledge was about to destroy everything we've built." The displays showed the final moments before the system's destruction. The Stargazer's weapons charging, the precise calculations needed to trigger a chain reaction that would eliminate the threat completely. "My crew understood the consequences," He-Jin said softly. "Every one of them knew what would happen to their careers, to Earth's standing in the galaxy. They followed my orders anyway, because they had seen the evidence. They knew what was at stake." She could see understanding beginning to dawn among some of the assembled species. The Sentinel Corps members in the shadows had shifted their positions, their weapons no longer aimed directly at her. "The Ancient Ones weren't perfect," He-Jin continued. "They made mistakes. This wasn't just a database of knowledge, it was a prison. They couldn't destroy the hive mind, so they tried to contain it. But containment was failing, and we all know what would have happened next." The chamber had grown still again, but this time it was different. The initial shock and outrage had been replaced by something else, a dawning realization of what might have been. "I stand by my decision," He-Jin said, her voice firm. "I accept whatever punishment this tribunal deems appropriate. But I want the record to show that I acted not out of malice or disregard for ancient knowledge, but out of the duty to protect all life in this galaxy." The data crystals floated from her hand to the Chief Arbiter, their contents continuing to display across the chamber screens. The evidence was there for all to see. The failing containment fields, the growing energy signatures, the terrible choice that had to be made. Hajin stood in silence now, watching as the truth of what she had prevented began to sink in among the assembled species. She had known this moment would come from the instant she gave the order to destroy the system. Now, finally, they would all understand why. The sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber as young Mei Cho, Earth's chief diplomat, made her way to the central platform. Her traditional diplomatic robes flowed around her as she moved, the dark fabric a stark contrast to the chamber's crystalline walls. "Honorable members of the tribunal," she began, her voice clear and measured. "I come before you with evidence that will change the nature of these proceedings entirely." The assembled species stirred as young Mei produced a set of data crystals. Unlike the standard issue crystals He-Jin had presented, these were ancient, their surfaces etched with patterns that made the elder species visibly uncomfortable. These records, young Mei continued, were recovered from the archives of the First Contact Wars. They contained communications between the elder species regarding the seventh star system. She paused, letting her words sink in. Communications that began long before Captain Lee made her decision. The Chief Arbiter's energy form flickered with what might have been concern. Those records were sealed by council decree. Yes, young Mei agreed. They were. The question is, why? The chamber's holographic displays came to life once again, but this time they showed something different. Ancient communications scrolled across the screens, translations appearing in multiple languages. He-Jin watched as the color drained from Elder Sangho's face. 300 cycles ago, young Mei read from the displays. The Crystal Collective detected the first signs of containment failure in the seventh star system. They reported it to the Council of Elder Species. She moved through the data with practiced precision. 200 cycles ago, the Evolved confirmed that the hive mind was beginning to stir. They too brought their findings to the council. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the younger species in the chamber. The elder species remained conspicuously silent. But it gets worse, young Mei continued. 50 cycles ago, a joint study by 3 elder species confirmed that the containment failure was accelerating. Their recommendation. She paused, looking directly at the Chief Arbiter. To continue observation and debate the proper historical protocols for handling such a situation. He-Jin felt a cold anger building in her chest as she listened. All those lives lost to the first hive mind attack could have been prevented if the elder species had acted sooner. Young Mei's voice hardened. The human captain acted while you all watched and waited. How many worlds would have been lost to your inaction? How many species would have been consumed while you debated protocols? The evidence displayed on the screens was irrefutable. Meeting notes, research data, probability calculations, all showing that the elder species had known about the threat and chosen to do nothing. The Crystal Collective calculated a 97% chance of containment failure within the year, young Mei revealed. The Evolved's simulations showed that once free, the hive mind would consume 12 inhabited systems within the first month alone. The younger species in the chamber began to react with growing anger. The aquatic's water chambers bubbled violently. The hive collective's warrior caste clicked their mandibles in agitation. But the most damning evidence, young Mei said, pulling up a final set of records, is this: a proposal to evacuate the elder species worlds while leaving the younger civilizations unwarned. A proposal that was under serious consideration when Captain Lee discovered the truth. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had evolved from prey animals showed signs of panic. Those with warrior traditions began making threats. The guards moved closer to the elder species representatives, weapons ready. He-Jin stepped forward to stand beside young Mei. "You didn't just fail to act," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You were going to sacrifice us, all of us younger species. Our worlds would have been the first line of defense while you retreated to safety." The Chief Arbiter's energy form had dimmed considerably. The protocols for handling Ancient One's artifacts are absolute. The protocols, young Mei interrupted, were written by the elder species to maintain their power. But power comes with responsibility. You failed that responsibility. She turned to address the entire chamber. Captain Lee made the hard choice that you couldn't make. She destroyed priceless knowledge, yes, but in doing so, she saved countless lives. Lives that you had already decided were expendable. The evidence continued to scroll across the displays, damning in its completeness. The elder species had gambled with the lives of younger civilizations, betting that someone else would solve the problem before it was too late. I move, young Mai declared formally, that this tribunal be dissolved. Furthermore, I move for an immediate review of the elder species' authority over matters affecting younger civilizations. We cannot trust our futures to those who would sacrifice us for their own survival. He-Jin watched as the chamber descended into intense debate. The power structure that had governed galactic civilization for thousands of years was crumbling before her eyes. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if this had been another test, not from the elder species, but from the ancient ones themselves. A test to see which species would act when action was needed, regardless of the cost. The truth was out now, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be quite the same again. The 3 days of deliberation felt longer than any battle He-Jin had ever fought. The Stargazer remained in position, her crew waiting anxiously for news. Throughout the galaxy, species young and old watched their communication devices, waiting for the tribunal's decision. Inside the temporary quarters assigned to her, He-Jin spent the time reviewing her logs, preparing for every possible outcome. Elder Sang-Ho and Young Mi visited when protocol allowed, bringing news of the heated debates taking place behind closed doors. The younger species are demanding reform, Young Mi had told her during one such visit. Your actions have sparked something that can't be contained. When the summons finally came, the Grand Chamber looked different. The ascending rings had been rearranged, with younger species now placed at the same level as their elder counterparts. The military presence remained, but their weapons were lowered. He-Jin took her place on the central platform, noting how the atmosphere had changed. The earlier hostility had been replaced by something more complex, a mix of respect, fear, and curiosity. The Chief Arbiter's energy form descended from above, its color now a deep blue that filled the chamber with calm light. The being's voice, when it came, carried none of its previous accusation. 3 days we have deliberated, it began. 3 days of testimony, evidence, and debate. What began as a trial has become something far more significant. The chamber fell silent as the Chief Arbiter continued. Captain He-Jin Lee's actions, while in violation of our laws, saved countless lives. This incident has exposed fundamental flaws in our governing structure. The human capacity for decisive action, while sometimes brutal, has proven necessary. Murmurs rippled through the assembled species. He-Jin remained still, waiting. Therefore, this tribunal makes the following judgment. Captain Lee's destruction of the 7th star system is hereby declared a necessary act of galactic preservation. All charges are dismissed. But the Arbiter wasn't finished. Furthermore, the evidence presented by Earth's diplomatic courts has revealed systemic failures in our governing structure. The Council of Elder Species is hereby dissolved. A new council will be formed, with equal representation from all spacefaring civilizations. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of reactions. Some species celebrated, others protested, but all knew they were witnessing a historic moment. Captain Lee, the Arbiter, addressed her directly. Your actions, while controversial, have forced us to confront our own failings. Humanity's approach to galactic affairs. Direct action when needed, regardless of political consequence, has proven to be a valuable addition to our community. He-Jin stood before them, vindicated but not triumphant. She understood that this wasn't just about her or even about humanity. This was about the evolution of galactic society itself. Thank you, Arbiter, she said simply. What happens now? Now, the being's energy form pulsed with what might have been amusement. We rebuild. The new council will need representatives who understand both the need for caution and the importance of action. Earth will have a seat at that table. As He-Jin left the chamber, she caught fragments of conversations among the delegates. Species that had once looked down on humanity's primitive approaches were now discussing the value of decisive action. Others were already forming new alliances, preparing for the changed political landscape. "They'll never look at us the same way again," Young Mai said, falling into step beside her. "Good," He-Jin replied. "We're not here to be liked. We're here to survive, all of us together." The walk back to the transport room felt different this time. Guards from various species saluted as she passed, not a formal requirement, but a gesture of respect. Even the Crystal Collective representatives nodded in acknowledgement. As she waited for the transport beam to take her back to the Stargazer, He-Jin thought about the future. The galaxy was changing, and humanity's reputation for bold action would never be the same. They would be feared by some, respected by others, but ignored by none. The transport beam engaged, and as she dissolved into energy, He-Jin allowed herself a small smile. She had destroyed an ancient artifact to save lives, and in doing so, had helped create something new. A galactic society that valued action as much as wisdom, courage as much as knowledge. Back on the Stargazer's bridge, Commander Park was waiting with the rest of the crew. Their faces showed both relief and pride as she stepped off the transport pad. "Orders, Captain?" he asked, standing at attention. He-Jin looked around at her crew, the people who had stood by her decision, knowing the risks. "Set course for Earth," she said. "We have a new galaxy to help build." As the Stargazer went to warp, He-Jin knew that this was just the beginning. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not by following ancient protocols, but by doing what they did best, acting decisively when action was needed, regardless of the cost. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be.